There's a house in Gloucester, England, that hides a chilling secret. Behind its walls, one of the most horrifying crime sprees in British history unfolded. Fred and Rose West were more than just a married couple. They were monsters, and their story is one you'll never forget. Imagine living next door to someone so normal, so ordinary, that you'd never guess the darkness lurking beneath. That was Fred and Rose West. From the outside, they seemed like an average working-class family, but inside their home, a nightmare was unfolding. A nightmare that claimed the lives of 12 innocent victims. Today, we're diving deep into the twisted world of this infamous couple, unraveling how they managed to live double lives for decades while committing some of the most unthinkable crimes. How could a couple like Fred and Rose West hide such unspeakable horrors in plain sight? This isn't just a question. It's the chilling heart of their story. To neighbors, they seemed ordinary, maybe a bit rough around the edges, but certainly not the type of people anyone would suspect of murder. Friends and acquaintances saw a family trying to make ends meet, raising children in a modest home on Cromwell Street. Even their own children, though subjected to an unimaginable nightmare behind closed doors, didn't fully understand the extent of their parents' monstrous acts. So how did they do it? How did two of Britain's most infamous serial killers manage to live among unsuspecting neighbors and friends for decades without anyone uncovering their deadly secret? The answer lies in a sinister blend of manipulation, deceit, and calculated evil. Fred and Rose were masters of control. They preyed on vulnerable people, those who wouldn't be missed, like runaways or young women with nowhere else to turn. They created a facade of normalcy, cleverly concealing their true nature. Fred had a charisma that made people drop their guard, while Rose's role as a doting mother and wife added to the illusion. Together, they formed a partnership that thrived on lies and terror. But the signs were there, hidden in plain sight. Neighbors sometimes reported strange smells coming from their property or unusual activity at odd hours. Friends occasionally raised eyebrows at the children's unkempt appearance and withdrawn behavior. Yet no one connected the dots. Maybe it was denial, or maybe it was the belief that such evil simply couldn't exist within arm's reach. To understand how they got away with it for so long, we need to go back to the beginning, before the murders, before the lies, before Fred and Rose became the infamous Wests. Their story didn't begin with violence. It began with troubled childhoods, dark secrets, and a series of choices that would ultimately lead them down a path of unimaginable destruction. Fred and Rose's relationship wasn't just based on shared trauma. It was built on a foundation of manipulation, control, and a mutual hunger for violence. The moment Fred met Rose, he saw an opportunity to not only mold her, but to use her in ways that would further his darkest desires. To Fred, Rose wasn't just a partner. She was a tool, and Rose, herself scarred by a traumatic upbringing, found comfort in the chaos that Fred offered. It didn't take long before they became an inseparable, lethal team. Fred's predatory tendencies, which had begun in his teenage years, quickly resurfaced after he met Rose. His charm, which had once helped him manipulate others into doing his bidding, now became a tool to draw women into their home under false pretenses. He would often offer vulnerable women a place to stay or a job, preying on their desperation. But what these women didn't know was that Fred had much darker intentions, ones that involved his sadistic urges. Fred's manipulation didn't stop with women. He found a way to exploit the very people who should have been closest to him, his children. Both Fred and Rose were, by all accounts, horrific parents. They maintained a false facade of family normalcy, but behind the scenes, they subjected their children to unimaginable horrors. The abuse was psychological, emotional, and physical, but perhaps the most chilling aspect of their parenting was the indifference to their children's suffering. The West's children grew up in an atmosphere of fear and cruelty. As Fred and Rose's relationship progressed, their criminal activities became bolder. Fred had a history of sexual violence, but now he had Rose, someone who was just as twisted and just as capable of luring women to their deaths. The couple didn't simply kill for the thrill of it. They used their victims as pawns in a sick game of power and control. Rose played her part by being the caring, seemingly innocent wife, while Fred often played the role of the charming, charismatic man who could gain anyone's trust. Together, they formed a deadly duo that allowed them to operate without suspicion for years. It wasn't long before the West's home at 25 Cromwell Street became the epicenter of their horrors. The house itself was not just a home, it was a prison, a torture chamber, a place where nightmares came to life. The West's home was a seemingly ordinary house on a quiet street, which made it the perfect location for their gruesome activities. To outsiders, it appeared like any other family home. But within its walls, Fred and Rose carried out a series of brutal murders. Their home became the final resting place for many young women who had fallen prey to the couple's sadistic manipulations. Over the years, Fred and Rose's spree of violence escalated. The first murder they committed together is believed to have been that of 18-year-old Linda May Healy in 1973. Linda was a young woman who lived in a nearby town and had met Fred and Rose through a local job agency. Like so many others before her, she was lured to their home under the guise of friendship or a job offer. Once inside, Linda became trapped in a nightmare. Fred was the first to strike. He raped and strangled her while Rose watched. They buried her body under the patio of their home, where it would remain hidden for years. But this was only the beginning. As their confidence grew, so did their brutality. Fred and Rose's methods became more refined as they learned to cover their tracks. They learned how to manipulate their victims, how to control them, how to get them to trust them enough to walk into their death traps. The couple knew exactly how to prey on vulnerable women, runaways, sex workers, young women with few ties and no place to turn. The murders were not only a means of satisfying their twisted desires, but also a form of ownership. Fred and Rose saw their victims not as human beings, but as objects to be controlled, tortured, and ultimately destroyed. In their minds, these women were disposable, a mere commodity in a world that had wronged them. The couple's emotional detachment from the suffering they inflicted is one of the most chilling aspects of their crimes. One of the most disturbing details of the West's murders was their casualness. They were not operating in secret or on the run. They continued to live their lives as if everything was normal. Neighbors described the Wests as a quiet, if somewhat eccentric couple. They hosted dinner parties, held barbecues, and appeared to be a regular family on the surface. But in the privacy of their home, Fred and Rose were carrying out atrocities that would eventually shock the world. They were so comfortable in their ability to deceive that they even involved their children in their crimes. At times, Fred would allow his daughters to act as lookouts while he carried out the murders, while Rose would later help dispose of the bodies. The children, living in a home where violence and manipulation were normal, didn't fully understand the gravity of what was happening around them. Some later reported seeing the women who were kept captive in the house, but did not understand why they were there. Fred and Rose's ability to conceal their crimes was aided by their deceptive personalities. Fred, in particular, was a master manipulator who knew how to blend in with society. He charmed everyone he met, gaining their trust and making himself seem like a harmless, decent man. In reality, Fred was anything but that. His ability to hide in plain sight, to blend into everyday life while committing such horrific acts, is one of the reasons why their crimes went undetected for so long. But despite their meticulousness, there were still signs that something was wrong. Neighbors began to notice strange smells emanating from the West's garden and reported seeing unusual activity at all hours of the night. There were whispers among the local community about Fred's erratic behavior, but no one knew for sure what was going on inside the walls of 25 Cromwell Street. Despite these whispers, the couple managed to keep their double life intact for over 20 years. They continued their spree of murders throughout the 1970s and 1980s, claiming at least 12 victims. Each murder followed a disturbingly similar pattern. Fred would charm his victim into trusting him. Rose would play the role of the loving wife, and together they would trap the women in their home, torture them, and eventually kill them. By the mid-1990s, however, the West's world began to unravel. Fred's behavior became more erratic as he struggled to control the situation. His ability to manipulate others began to lose its effectiveness, and cracks began to show in his carefully constructed facade. Neighbors and friends began to grow suspicious. In 1994, one of Fred and Rose's daughters, who had been subjected to years of abuse, finally came forward with a heartbreaking account of the horrors she had endured. Her testimony provided the authorities with the key to unlocking the West's secrets. Investigators soon began to piece together the evidence that would expose Fred and Rose's twisted reign of terror. It didn't take long for the police to connect the dots between the missing women and the West's home. What they discovered was nothing short of horrifying. In 1994, after more than 2 decades of unimaginable horror, the West's empire of terror began to crumble. It all started with a moment of bravery from one of Fred and Rose's own daughters, who finally confided in a friend about the years of abuse she had suffered at the hands of her parents. The young woman, who had endured a lifetime of manipulation, fear, and violence, spoke out, revealing the extent of the horrors inside 25 Cromwell Street. This confession sparked an investigation that would ultimately expose the terrifying truth about the West's life behind closed doors. At first, the police believed they were investigating a case of child abuse. The allegations were serious enough to warrant action, but nothing could have prepared them for what they would uncover. Armed with a search warrant, detectives arrived at the West's home, expecting to find evidence of physical and emotional abuse. But what they found was far worse than anyone could have imagined. During their search, police dug up the garden at 25 Cromwell Street, initially focusing on the area around the house. What they uncovered would change the course of the investigation and the lives of everyone involved. Human remains were discovered buried beneath the earth, each layer revealing more than just bones. It was evidence of multiple lives violently extinguished. The bodies of several women, each believed to have been victims of the Wests, were discovered in the yard. The horror didn't stop there. As the investigation continued, police discovered more remains, hidden beneath the house itself and scattered around the property. The full extent of Fred and Rose's crimes began to come to light, piece by horrifying piece. Fred and Rose were arrested in the wake of the discoveries, but the investigation was far from over. Fred, initially attempting to protect his wife, eventually began to crack under the pressure of questioning. In a series of interrogations, Fred confessed to multiple murders, claiming responsibility for the killings in an attempt to shield Rose from the blame. Fred's confessions were chilling in their detail and coldness. He described how he and Rose had lured their victims into their home, where they would be subjected to brutal torture before ultimately being murdered. He even went so far as to explain the methods they used to dispose of the bodies, all while showing no remorse. Despite Fred's attempts to take full responsibility for the murders, the evidence against Rose was overwhelming. Investigators uncovered details that placed her directly at the scene of each crime. In fact, there was ample evidence suggesting that Rose was not just a passive participant in the killings, she was an active and willing accomplice. She had been involved in every aspect of the murders, from selecting victims to helping bury the bodies. Rose's role in the crimes was undeniable, and the evidence painted her as just as guilty as Fred. As the case moved forward, the true extent of Fred and Rose's atrocities became clear. The couple had murdered at least 12 women over the course of 20 years, with their victims often being young, vulnerable women who were lured into their home under false pretenses. The West's ability to blend into society while carrying out such horrific acts was one of the most chilling aspects of their crimes. Their neighbors had seen them as a normal family, hosting parties and raising children while secretly being responsible for countless deaths. The details of their crimes, which included the sexual abuse, torture, and murder of women, shocked the nation. The fact that Fred and Rose had managed to evade justice for so long, all while continuing to live in plain sight, left people stunned and horrified. When the case finally reached the courts, the shocking truth was laid bare. Fred West was charged with 12 murders, but before the trial could take place, he committed suicide in his prison cell on January 1st, 1995. Fred's death meant that he would never face the full consequences of his actions, but the evidence left behind was enough to ensure that Rose would be held accountable for her role in the murders. Rose's trial began in 1995, just months after Fred's death. Throughout the proceedings, she maintained her innocence, claiming that she was a victim of Fred's manipulation and that she had been coerced into committing the murders. But the evidence told a different story. Rose was found guilty of 10 murders, and the jury was convinced that she had played an active and willing role in the killings. In the end, Rose was sentenced to life in prison for her involvement in the murders. She was sent to a women's prison, where she remains to this day, serving out her sentence without the possibility of parole. Despite her conviction, Rose's demeanor during the trial and afterward was cold and unrepentant. She never showed any remorse for the lives she took, nor did she seem to comprehend the magnitude of her crimes. Even after the trial, Rose maintained that she was just as much a victim as the women she helped murder. The West's story shocked the world and remains one of the most infamous cases of serial killings in British history. The fact that Fred and Rose were able to live among unsuspecting neighbors and friends for so long, all while hiding their gruesome secret, serves as a stark reminder of the lengths to which some people will go to conceal their true nature. The case also highlighted the dangerous combination of manipulation, control, and violence that Fred and Rose embodied, showing how they were able to prey on vulnerable individuals and, for a time, evade justice. The aftermath of the West's crimes left a lasting impact on the local community, as well as the families of their victims. The people who had lived near the Wests, who had trusted them and interacted with them for years, were left reeling from the realization that the couple they had known were capable of such atrocities. For the victims' families, the discovery of the remains and the details of the murders were a nightmare they could never have imagined. Fred West's death in prison meant that the full truth about his crimes would never be revealed, but the evidence that was uncovered was enough to send Rose to prison for life. The case remains a chilling example of the evil that can lurk beneath the surface, hiding in plain sight, and the lengths to which some individuals will go to conceal their darkest desires. The story of Fred and Rose West stands as one of the most horrific and chilling in British history, a grim reminder that monsters don't always look like monsters. They don't always lurk in dark alleys or hide behind masks. In fact, some of the most dangerous predators walk among us, blending in so seamlessly that we fail to recognize the evil in front of us until it's too late. Fred and Rose West managed to live normal lives in plain sight, deceiving everyone around them, from neighbors and friends to even their own children, hiding their horrific crimes behind a facade of ordinary family life. For decades, they evaded detection, their true nature buried beneath layers of charm, manipulation, and brutality. Their story is one of manipulation, control, and violence, but it is also a cautionary tale about how easily these dark personalities can blend into society. Fred, with his charming and affable demeanor, and Rose, with her quiet, unassuming nature, were able to lull everyone around them into a false sense of security. Their neighbors, co-workers, and even friends had no idea of the horrors taking place within the walls of 25 Cromwell Street. The couple hosted dinner parties, raised children, and appeared to live a normal life, all the while hiding the bodies of their victims in the garden, under the floorboards, and elsewhere on their property. The true extent of their crimes didn't come to light until 1994, when one of their daughters finally found the courage to speak out about the abuse she had suffered in the home. This moment, though heartbreaking, was the catalyst for the investigation that would eventually unravel the horrific truth about Fred and Rose. It's impossible to understand the emotional toll this must have taken on their children, growing up in an environment that, for all outward appearances, seemed like a normal household, but which was, in reality, a place of unspeakable violence and terror. The fact that these children were raised in such an atmosphere of fear and manipulation speaks volumes about the depths of Fred and Rose's depravity. The discovery of the bodies buried in the garden at 25 Cromwell Street was a sickening revelation that sent shockwaves through the community. The victims, at least 12 young women, had been lured into the West's home with promises of jobs or a safe place to stay. Once inside, they became trapped in a nightmarish world where they were subjected to unspeakable horrors. Fred and Rose did not just kill their victims, they tortured them, broke them, and in many cases involved their own children in the aftermath of these murders. To think that this went on for so long without anyone raising the alarm is a testament to the West's ability to deceive and manipulate those around them. The community's shock and horror at the West's true nature is compounded by the fact that they were seen as just another family, no different from any of the others living on that street. The Wests were able to mask their true selves with ease, hiding in plain sight, living in a house that was often filled with the sounds of laughter and everyday life, all while carrying out their horrific crimes behind closed doors. It wasn't until the truth began to emerge that people realized just how wrong everything had been. Neighbors who had once waved hello to Fred and Rose now found themselves haunted by the realization that they had unknowingly lived next to monsters. The West's crimes weren't just a tragedy for the victims they killed, they also left lasting scars on the community and on the families who were left behind. The families of the victims, of course, were forever shattered by the loss of their loved ones. The discovery that these young women had been lured to their deaths by a couple who appeared to be harmless, perhaps even friendly, only deepened the horror of their deaths. For these families, the pain of losing a child, a sister, or a friend was compounded by the crushing realization that the people responsible for their deaths had been living in plain sight, hiding in a community that had no idea of the evil taking place in their midst. But the impact was not limited to the victims' families. The entire community around Cromwell Street was forever changed. How could they have been so blind? How could they have missed the signs, the subtle red flags that something was terribly wrong? The fact that Fred and Rose were able to deceive everyone around them for so long is a haunting reminder of the power of manipulation and the ways in which people can mask their true selves. Even after their arrest, many in the community struggled to come to terms with what had happened. It was as if their entire worldview had been shattered, and they were left to pick up the pieces. And what of the surviving children of Fred and Rose West? The trauma they must have experienced is unimaginable. For them, the world they had grown up in, the world of false smiles, loving gestures, and outward normalcy, was suddenly torn apart. The nightmare of living in a home where violence and murder were the order of the day was something they could never escape. The emotional scars left behind by their parents' actions will haunt them for the rest of their lives. The betrayal, the manipulation, and the sense of having been trapped in a prison of fear will shape the rest of their existence, even if they are able to rebuild their lives. No one should have to grow up under such circumstances, and the fact that Fred and Rose managed to shield their monstrous nature for so long is a tragic testament to the extent of their manipulation and control. As the case of Fred and Rose West continues to echo through history, it serves as a reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the most unsuspecting of places. It shows us that evil doesn't always wear the face of a monster. It can be hidden behind the mask of normality, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The West's crimes left an indelible mark on the community, the families they affected, and on the collective consciousness of a nation that was forced to confront the brutal reality of what had taken place behind closed doors. Their story is one of manipulation, control, and tragedy. It serves as a chilling warning that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones you least suspect. If you found this story haunting, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss our future videos.